But first and foremost, call halal Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushua, Bahashem Kwadash. And once again, double honors go out to the apostles, bishops, and elders of Great Millstone who rule well. I'd like to also send salutations out to the fellow Akim that are out there on the highways and byways, week in and week out, and that also put in work as far as, uploading and distributing across the internet. All the videos that helped go out, and edify the hopeful elect of our people, and whoever else might care to, understand what's going on, and maybe they might be one of the hopeful elect. But at the same time, we realize that a lot of you just view this as entertainment. Like I always say, hey, that's to your own detriment. All right, so here we are. This copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair uses are use permitted by copyright statutes that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Once again, fair use, fair use, fair use. All right. So ultimately, that's what I'm doing. I'm not profiting off of this whatsoever. I'm using it just as it states. All right. Criticism, comment, news reporting, and teaching. All right. So here we go. In this video, we're going to be discussing this gentleman right here. All right. Oluwada Equiano. All right. And he's going to tell his story, and we're going to look him up here in Wikipedia and see what these devils tried to do. All right. But he was making an account of his early life before he was snatched. And as you're going to see, what these devils try to do is say, well, no, he confused his account with, anything to hide who he was in an attempt to erase, once again, as we know, all right, who these people in West Africa actually were. So here we go. Let's get started. This is from History Morsels. All right, here we go.
Sits down at a writing desk somewhere in London, England. He dips his pen in ink. His hand.
Hold on, it's not, for some reason. That's why. Salaki. All right, because I know if I do this, let me. All right, there's a conflict in between. There we go. I'm like, I can barely hear that. Here we go.
Have felt iron shackles.
There we go.
His lungs have breathed the rotting air in the hold of a slave ship. He has been bought and sold more than once. He has crossed the Atlantic Ocean in chains. And now, after everything, he is free. And what does he choose to write? He does not open his book with rage. He does not open it with despair. Opens it.
So what if he did? I had to stop it right there because when I initially was watching it, I said, why were they so quick to... Well, he didn't open it with rage or despair. All right. The nerve of these motherfuckers after everything was done to him. So what? What if he did?
With something that nobody expected. He writes that before the slave traders ever came for him, his people back in West Africa were already living by laws that sounded almost identical to the laws of ancient Israel. Circumcision on the 8th day after birth, blood sacrifices, first fruit offerings to God, ritual purification after touching a dead body, strict dietary laws. He lists them one by one, and then he asks a question that nobody in the British Empire had a clean answer to. He asks, could it be that my people are connected to the ancient Hebrews? That question went into one of the best-selling books of 1789, and it was quietly buried for nearly 200 years. Today, we are going to dig it back up, because what Oluwada Equiano wrote in that book is not legend, not myth, and not speculation. It is a first-hand eyewitness account from a man who lived inside that culture before the slave ships ever arrived. And once you hear what he actually wrote, you will understand why certain people in power needed that account to disappear. 9, and it was quietly buried for nearly 200 years. Today, we are going to dig it back up, because what Olaudah Equiano wrote in that book is not legend, not myth, and not speculation. It is a first-hand eyewitness account from a man who lived inside that culture before the slave ships ever arrived. And once you hear what he actually wrote, you will understand why certain people in power needed that account to disappear. To understand why Equiano's testimony matters so deeply, you first have to understand who he was and what was taken from him. Around the year 1745, a boy was born in a village in what is now southeastern Nigeria. His name was Olaudah Equiano. He was born into the Igbo people, one of the largest ethnic groups in West Africa. His father was a community elder, a man of rank and authority, the kind of figure the Igbo called an embrenche. This was not a poor or forgotten family. This was a family with standing, with traditions, with deep roots going back generations. Young Olaudah grew up watching his father carry out the rituals and ceremonies that held his community together. He learned the customs of his people the way all children learned, not from textbooks, but from living inside them every single day. Then, one afternoon in approximately 1756, when Equiano was around 11 years old, slave raiders came while the adults of the village were working in the fields. The children were home. And in one devastating moment, Equiano and his sister were seized, separated, and his world ended. He was passed from trader to trader across hundreds of miles of the African interior before he ever saw the ocean. When he finally reached the coast and saw the slave ship waiting in the water, he later wrote that he believed he was going to be eaten by the white men on board. That was how foreign and terrifying this world was to a child from an inland village. He had never seen the ocean. He had never seen a large sailing vessel. And yet he was forced into the ship's hold with hundreds of other human beings, packed so tightly they could barely move, in conditions so horrific that people began to die around him within days. The crossing of the Atlantic that Equiano survived is known to history as the Middle Passage. Historians estimate that somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million enslaved Africans died during these crossings alone before they ever reached the other side. Equiano survived, but that survival would cost him nearly everything he had ever known. He was sold in Barbados, he was renamed, he was moved again, sold again, and eventually came to work for a British naval officer named Michael Henry Pascal, who gave him the name Gustavus Vasa, a name Equiano was forced to carry for many years. He sailed on British naval vessels during the 7 Years' War. He educated himself, learning to read and write English with fierce determination. He converted to Christianity. He saved money across years of labor and negotiation. And in 1766, approximately 10 years after he was first kidnapped, Olaudah Equiano purchased his own freedom. Think about that. He was stolen from his home at age 11. He crossed the Atlantic in chains. He was renamed, resold, and stripped of everything. And he came out the other side free, literate, educated, and with a story that the world needed to hear.
Hello.
Hey, you want to play with me?
Sure. You want me to help you with your groceries?
For the next 2 decades after gaining his freedom, Equiano continued traveling, working, writing, and thinking. He became involved in the growing abolitionist movement in Britain. He was friends with prominent abolitionists. He testified before Parliament. He advocated loudly for the end of the slave trade. And in 1789, he published the book that would cement his place in history. The full title was The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vassa, the African, written by himself. That last phrase, written by himself, was not a small detail. It was a declaration. Because one of the primary weapons used by defenders of the slave trade was the claim that Africans were not fully rational beings, that they could not produce literature, that they had no complex inner life worthy of documentation. Equiano's autobiography dismantled that.
Said to justify their treatment of our people, and along with many other things that these devils did to try to dehumanize us.
That argument on sight. Here was a man who had been enslaved, who had been stripped of his name, who had crossed the Atlantic in chains, and who had written an eloquent, detailed, philosophically sophisticated account of his own life in the English language. The book was a literary and political earthquake. It went through 9 editions in his lifetime. It was read across Britain, Ireland, and the American colonies. It was serialized and distributed by abolitionist organizations. Equiano himself traveled across the British Isles to promote it, giving speeches and selling copies. He became famous. He became one of the most recognized black voices in Britain. He married an Englishwoman named Susanna Cullen in 1792. He had a family. But here is what most modern discussions of Equiano leave out. They focus on his account of the slave trade, on his descriptions of the Middle Passage, on the brutal conditions he witnessed. And those sections are important. They are among the most powerful eyewitness accounts of the slave trade that exist. But there is another section of that book that tends to get passed over quickly, and it may be the most historically remarkable section of all. In the early chapters of the narrative, before he ever describes the slave ship, Equiano describes his homeland. He describes the Igbo people, their government, their culture, their economy, their music, their food. And he does something that no other enslaved African writer had done in published English literature up to that point. He sits the customs of his people directly next to the laws of the Old Testament and says,
Oh, you knew they had trouble. You just knew. Once they said there was a problem, you knew it had to be this section here. Let's
"Look,
continue.
these match." And he is specific. He does not speak in vague poetic language. He lists customs one by one and cites chapter and verse. This is not a folk tale passed down through generations. This is a first-hand account from a man who lived inside that culture, written in one of the most widely read books of the entire 18th century.
Look at that. Ancient rituals that matched. Oh, crap. It went off. Hold on. Ancient. Damn it. Ancient rituals that matched Leviticus perfectly. You know damn well they didn't want this out. Remember Psalms 83, right?
Now this is the part of the story that you cannot fully appreciate until you see the details laid out. So let us go through exactly what Equiano wrote and exactly what the Old Testament says. The first and most striking parallel Equiano describes is circumcision. He writes that among his people, male children were circumcised at 8 days old. Not at birth, not at some later age of initiation, 8 days. If you open the book of Genesis, chapter 17, verse 12, you will find God
Let's get it. All right. Therefore, I said unto the children of Israel, no soul of you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger that sojourneth among you eat blood. Okay. Then what say you to these pretenders, these Israelis? Their custom is to what? To circumcise or to finish it at least with um, putting their mouth and removing the foreskin. Isn't that eating of blood? All right, let's continue on. We'll come back to that.
Instructing Abraham that every male child shall be circumcised when he is 8 days old. The same instruction appears again in Leviticus chapter 12. The 8th day is not a coincidence. Across cultures and across history, circumcision practices vary enormously in timing. Some cultures perform it at birth, others at puberty, others at marriage. The specific detail of the 8th day is a distinctive marker, and Equiano says his people observed it.
All right, and let's go to the New Testament. Let's go to Romans. It's another thing. All right, we're not worried about any other culture, but the Israelite. All right, let's go to 14, I believe it is. Let's see. All right. It says, for when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves. It's talking about the Israelite foreigners, not actual heathen. All right. Which shew, verse 15, the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the mean while accusing or else excusing one another. All right, continuing on.
The man grew up there. He saw it. Now here's a question worth sitting with. If your ancestors practiced something as specific as circumcision on the 8th day, passed down across centuries, what does that suggest to you about the origin of that practice? The second parallel Equiano describes involves ritual offerings and blood sacrifice. He writes that his people offered the first fruits of their harvest and performed animal sacrifices in religious ceremonies. In the Old Testament, first fruit offerings are commanded repeatedly. Leviticus chapter 2, Numbers chapter 28, Deuteronomy chapter 26. The concept of offering the first portion of the harvest to God before the community eats is one of the most distinctive features of ancient Israelite religious practice. It is not universal. It is not found in every ancient African religious system. Equiano says his community had their own version of these distinctions.
Let's back that up.
Third,
Hold on.
Equiano describes it is not universal. It is not found in every ancient African religious system.
What?
Equiano says his
For you African, won't keep calling people African. What did it just tell you? All right.
Had their own version of these distinctions. Third, Equiano describes purification rituals after contact with the dead. He writes that among his people, anyone who touched a dead body was required to undergo a process of ritual cleansing before they could rejoin the community. Open the book of Numbers, chapter 19. You will find a detailed set of laws governing exactly this.
Let's go. Let's go. This is what they're afraid of. All right. All right. Laws for purification. All right. Let's see. Let's see. Uh-huh. 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 All right. Here it is, verse 11. He that toucheth the dead body of any man shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with it on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day he shall be clean. But if He purify not himself the third day, then the seventh day he shall not be clean. All right, let's go 13. Hold on. Went a little bit too far. Whosoever touches the dead body of any man that is dead, and purify not himself, defileth the tabernacle of the Most High, whose name is Yahweh. And that soul shall be cut off from Israel, because the water of separation was not sprinkled upon him. He shall be unclean. His uncleanness is yet upon him. Wow. God.
It's natural things to slow down in the bed, but why settle for natural? This has us jumping.
7 days and must undergo specific purification rites before being restored to the community. This is not a concept that appears in every ancient culture. It is one of the more distinctive features of the Mosaic Law, and Equiano says his people practiced it. Fourth, Equiano writes about dietary laws and distinctions between clean and unclean animals. He describes how his people had specific prohibitions around certain foods and animals. The Mosaic dietary codes in Leviticus chapter 11 and Deuteronomy chapter 14 are among the most detailed and distinctive legal texts in the entire Old Testament. The specific distinctions drawn between animals that can be eaten and animals that cannot are a hallmark of Israelite identity. Equiano says his community had their own.
Let that sink in. The hallmark